Hi everybody, thanks for coming to watch my demo during Lightbox Expo. My name is Laurel Austin and I've been working in the video games industry for over a decade doing visual development, concept design, and illustration. Over my career, I've been able to work in many different genres: post-apocalyptic dystopias, high fantasy full of dragons, orcs, and elves, fantasy horror, and many sci-fi worlds set near in time to today and far into the future. I love many aspects of visual development, but one of my most favorite things to do is to design and paint creatures. I have a huge love of anything to do with the animal kingdom and taking what I know about real animals to make mythic creatures into believable designs. So today I'll be demoing my design process for one specific mythical creature, the Cockatrice, a beast that was oddly popular during the Middle Ages. Essentially a dragon with the head of a rooster. So when I'm thinking about designing anything really, let alone a creature, what I'm thinking is, what is my goal with regards to what I'm doing? The reason I picked a Cockatrice today was because for me, they are kind of a goofy idea. They are a dragon with the head of a chicken, a really like silly Middle Ages kind of mythic animal. And for me, that's kind of a fun thing. They're one of those. They're one of the weirdest, decently well-known like spliced animals. Like griffins. Griffins are sort of inherently cooler because it's an eagle and it's a lion, or like a Cerberus where it's like a dog with 3 heads. But in this, it's a chicken. Like it's a big chicken. The dragon part of it is like it. At best, it seems like it could be a silly-looking dragon. So for me, it's a fun challenge to try to make it like something at least halfway serious. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. I'm going to try to make a Cockatrice that looks legit, if not quite as cool as a dragon, at least sort of fun and scary in its own right, and something that if you happened upon it in a dark alley, you would be like legit scared of, and you wouldn't just think was like kind of dumb. Even if it would eat you afterwards, it wouldn't look dumb doing it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of trying to keep sort of birdish shapes, and I'm starting to think of chickens. So chickens for me, I like chickens. They're sort of a fun creature. There's actually a lot of variety in chicken breeds that do really unexpected things. Like some have really poofy feathers on their heads, and they have so many feathers you can barely see their bodies, and they are just sort of they're just fun and diverse animals that have a lot of stuff going for them. But the sort of chicken, like the sort of Looney Tunes foghorn leghorn chicken, is the one that sort of comes to mind iconically when people are thinking about chickens and roosters in particular, let's say. So what that is, it's a beak, it's an eye, it's a comb, and they look kind of like that, and they do not look scary. If you look closely at them, they actually have quite a lot of stuff going on, but you have to know when you're doing this kind of job, people who would be viewing your work have a lot of associations with what chickens are and what they're like and what it means to be a chicken, let's say. And those associations in Western culture, at least, are not scary associations. They are, they're Looney Tunes. They're the funny chicken on the farm that makes little clucking noises, and it crows on the roof of the farmer's house, and all that kind of stuff. And so you have very sort of like bucolic. Bucolic is like the best iteration of this, but really they're just sort of like. It's more like the one in Moana, who kind of had those big googly eyes and was a little bit dumb, and that's closer to the sort of chicken associations than something that you want to be sort of legitimately terrifying. So knowing that, what we can do is take what are notions of what chickens look like and what chickens are, kind of mix in the attributes that they have that are maybe more consistent with an actual scary creature, like their sort of very intense focusless gaze and their spiky feathers, and sometimes they have like patches of bare skin where you can see sort of that kind of, you know, often they have those red faces, so they can sometimes see patches of red skin under their necks and stuff, and we can take that kind of thing and kind of play with it more and bring those aspects a little more to the forefront than the sort of, you know, iconic rooster's comb that you would see in Looney Tunes. I think we do have to deal with that comb. We definitely have to have that comb because it is such a, without that you don't really have a rooster. Like you would think, you'd look at it, it looks kind of birdish, but you wouldn't think, oh man, that's a chicken. You need those flaps of skin and that sort of fleshy, spiky cone in order to cue people into that this is that this is actually a chicken. It's sort of thinking about what order do you want people to have associations with it. And so if you are doing something, if you're doing Cockatrice, it's a dragon with a chicken for a head, or rather, yes, a dragon with a chicken's head. So you probably, to make something look scary, you really want them to see dragon first and chicken second. So that will sort of guide how you approach these things. Like, when do you want people to notice one feature over another? So if that's the case, then I'm gonna leave the head for the moment. I have these sort of fleshy wattles, which are something that chickens have. They have these sort of droppy fleshy parts on their faces. Their comb is made of the same thing, but I'm just gonna leave that for now. I'm gonna focus on the body a little bit more. I'm gonna get kind of a pose that I like. So roosters actually have quite long necks, and that's entirely in keeping with dragons. So we can definitely have that. And they have these sort of long spiky feathers, and spiky feathers are great because you can kind of make them look sort of nasty and dangerous, and that is also totally in keeping with a scary animal that can turn you to stone. That's one of the things about cockatrices. They're really apparently in the way they've been used in sort of folklore and myth is they're kind of interchangeable with basilisks at a certain point, but they're just a little different. Basilisks, when they're depicted, tend to be more snake-like, and cockatrices tend to be more sort of bird-like and dragon-like. So that's kind of what I want to be doing. This guy will have sort of a more dragony body, but I don't want him to have 4 legs. Most of the depictions do not have 4 legs, so I will get rid of those. But then birds don't have 4 legs either. They just have the wings. So I think that's totally in keeping with that. It's kind of a long body. I'll keep it for now. I'll probably end up shortening that later, but we'll see. I think I'll have like kind of bird-like legs, but here's sort of where you can start thinking like, how much dragon do I want versus how much bird? Certainly the back of the animal, you could kind of go either way. You could do like shapes that were more bird-like and textures that were more dragon-like, or you could do, you can do all sorts of things. I kind of like that it's sort of bird legs if it's kind of like an ostrich or an emu, but a little bit more kind of nasty and snake-like. I think that's sort of a fun way to go. And so in this case, I kind of like, since there's sort of snakish associations with this creature, I want the dragon parts to be sort of by the end of the animal, I want it to be a little bit more snake-like. So I'm going to have these sorts of shapes, kind of like a very sort of sinuous and coiling kind of look. I kind of like that for this guy. You'll notice these shapes look kind of disjointed at the moment. So this is the kind of point when we'll start sort of bringing them together. The more stuff we add, this is me just thinking about proportions, but the more stuff we add, the more this will tend to make sense. I'm going to leave a little bit more room for myself, and I'm going to start on wings. And I kind of want him to have sort of a, an almost like subterranean appearance. Like I want him to feel like kind of creepy, kind of like, if he looked at you, you would turn to stone, which like a basilisk is how a cockatrice kills you. What I'm doing here is I kind of want him to have his arms sort of like kind of above his head, sort of half folded, kind of like a vulture or something. Some kind of like he's thinking about flying away, but he hasn't done it yet. Most of the pictures have dragon wings. So we'll keep with that. I think that's a fine thing to do. Maybe we can add feathers onto them in a way so it still looks a bit more bird-like if it has feathers in some places and dragon skin in another. There are not a lot of wings in nature that have both membrane and feathers as the flight surface, but there was a dinosaur, and I'm totally blanking on its name, that did. And it was a really, really weird creature. So that exists. I don't think I'm going to be using that as a super... it actually had a spike out of its wrist that actually held up the flight membrane. Anyway, it was a really cool dinosaur, and you guys should totally look it up because it's awesome. And so this is kind of my ugly sketch phase. I don't know about you guys, but my sketches are not like the prettiest. I consider myself more of a painter. There are people out there who can, spend 3 minutes on a drawing and it comes out amazing and fabulous. I'm not one of those people. So what I do is I tend to noodle at things for a while, and then eventually things will start to occur to me and I will render them more. And then eventually, with a bit of luck, they turn out looking cool, looking how I want them. So this is kind of fun. I'm kind of liking how this is, but I'm not too keen on the proportions here, so I'm gonna make the head a little smaller, and I think he kind of feels front heavy, like his center of gravity is like here, which would be he would probably not be able to stand up if he were in this pose in real life. So one thing we can do, if that's the case, then we can move him back to sort of move his center of gravity back, and that kind of works, but then he's not hunched over as much and he doesn't look quite as creepy. So another thing you can do is you can actually hunch him over a little bit more and kind of change the angle of that and maybe move his hip forward a little bit more. And that kind of works. That's kind of nice. Starting to work. And you can also sort of, this is because I haven't done a whole lot of posing at this point. You can kind of just go in here with your stuff and it works just fine. You're gonna go in here with your selection tool and your free transform, and it works really nicely. So I kind of want his head to be low, kind of like that. So his head is low. I imagine this guy, when he stands up, he's approximately, his eyeballs, his head is like only a little bit above a normal human head, so that when he stares you down and and turns you to stone, he's like right in front, like his head is right in front of your face, but the rest of him is just sort of looming above you, and is generally quite scary. And one thing, I mean, it's a very interesting feature of roosters, and it's well known that they have these, but maybe isn't the first thing you think about when you think about a rooster. This thing is the spur. It is a really long and nasty spike that kind of comes out of the back of their foot, just below their ankle. It's not a toe. It's just like a sword. It's just a weapon that they use to hurt other presumably predators and other roosters. And I think that is also entirely in keeping with a cockatrice, and you would be remiss for not including it. And sort of this is the point also to think about, like, what kind of feet you want. Like chickens have 3 claws front, and then they have the pad of their foot, and then they have 1 claw that goes back. I don't really like, for an animal this size, I don't really like a claw that goes back. It's okay, but it kind of makes walking for them a little bit awkward. If you look at like emu feet, and dinosaur feet are often the same way, and it's sort of how I think about dragon feet, is they have a pad and then they have 3 toes, and that's sort of what they're like. And that's, the emus are quite quick. And so I don't know how quick this guy is, but he's definitely, I want him to walk fairly easily. He's like a big lumbering animal, so I think he'd probably have feet that allow him to get around how he normally does. And also if we do that, then it kind of works for a dragon too. So it's sort of both chickeny and dragony, and that's all good and fine. So that's all right, though it doesn't look very scary, so I'm gonna make the claws bigger. Usually, if you want something to look scarier, often stick some more pointy shapes on them, and you will notice they get quite a bit scarier very quickly. So this isn't bad. This isn't bad. I'm kind of okay with the tail. I think here I'm going to use my warp tool. I do this all the time. This is one of the things that I like about you know, planning something in digital. You know, it just makes it incredibly easy. Where if you like the way you drew something, because in this case, in the tail, I like how those curves are looking, but they weren't in exactly the right place. So you know, I could just grab them and warp them and move them around. So I don't have to redraw them, but they get to where I want them to be. So there's his spur. I kind of got rid of that other leg, which I didn't like very much. I kind of want to be able to see his second leg in this picture, and with how I've posed the tail, that's sort of presenting some slight difficulty about how I'm going to do that. I don't want the legs to be posed exactly the same. I kind of want him to look like he's walking. So I could also move him forward even a little bit more. That'll do. So here's proportions that I'm pretty happy with for a start. So what I'll do now is I'm going to start adding tone. So to do this, I just make a new layer, take it to multiply, and fill it with a color, kind of any color. At this point, it doesn't matter because I'm using this sort of blue-gray color to sketch. That is my preference for today. Sometimes I'll use light blue, sometimes I'll use red, sometimes I'll use black, sometimes, you know, it just does not matter. It's sort of whatever works for you. And because I'm going to be changing it real quick here to begin with. That black was not on purpose. There we go. Yeah, really what I'm doing here is I'm just making a shape that I can turn into a way to get tone on this piece. So I'm just gonna grab the tail here, and I'm just using the lasso tool because it's easy. It is not very precise at all. And if you want to refine that shape a little bit, I just have a round tool here set to 100% opacity and without any pressure opacity, and I just kind of fill in the gaps to how I want them. And that works pretty nicely. And what I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to turn this to a medium gray now because I'm just going to work in tone. And what I do here is, for this guy, I kind of want him to be sort of a dark color, partly because the sort of iconic chicken color is white. I mean, you get plenty of, they come in all colors, of course. They come in brown, they come in red, they come in like tons and tons of colors. But, you know, foghorn leghorn is white. I probably don't want to lean too far into that sort of iconic farm chicken as a goal here, because that's the thing that's going to make him look. That's the thing that's going to make him look goofy. Not like that's the thing that's going to quickest cue people to be like, oh, what the heck is this thing? Why is she drawing weird chicken dragons? And to be clear, if you wanted to lean into that there are other reasons why you might want to lean into that. I think if you were making a creature that you wanted to be funny and silly, then then leaning into the cultural associations of chickens being kind of goofy is absolutely the right thing to do. And so figuring that out, it's all about what you're trying to do. My assumptions on these and staying away from those iconic chicken kind of things, I'm doing that for the reason that I want my creature to be scary. If I didn't want my creature to be scary, my choice structure would be very different. So that is a story for another drawing for sure. But just know that these are absolutely not rules. What you're doing is you're thinking about your goals and you are making choices in service of those goals. So here's something I'm going to show you guys now called a gradient map. It's something I've been using lately. Plenty of you probably already know it, but for those of you who don't, it's a really nice thing to sort of take a sketch and just give it a little bit more sort of a more even treatment to the values, or it can bring up your darks or pull down your lights, or you can do many different things. And it's a very, very handy tool to add to your repertoire, just to get the varieties of effects you might want in your work. So what it does is it takes all the it takes the value of structure of your work and it maps different colors of your choosing onto that value structure. So in this case, it took what I had before and it's mapping a medium sort of dark gray to my darks and then a white to my whites. So in this case, it took all my blacks and brought them up because this color is much brighter. If I change this to black, makes it black. So I'm just going to choose a few colors that I think are kind of nice. Here's blue, not feeling the blue. I kind of like this sort of dark purple and like a sort of, don't like that, like kind of like a medium tan, kind of a warmish tan, and then my light, not that, and then kind of a very, very light yellow, and then I want my whites to be white. And I can move this up and you can see it kind of does this. So this is just a fun thing to play around with. I would highly recommend it for just your sketching and just see what kind of things you could do with it. It's really quite useful. I wouldn't tend to use it for painting all that much, but as far as like just getting tone on a picture early, it can be really, really useful. And one thing that can happen when you're doing sort of with any adjustment layer, not just gradient maps, is it can make color picking a little bit more difficult. One of my favorite things that I found out, because I use adjustment layers in my painting work quite a bit, is this little sample menu here on the adjustment tool, this one right here. So the default Photoshop setting is all layers, which means when it color picks, it will color pick all the layers in your piece just as they appear. But one thing that I like is if I'm using adjustment layers, to use all layers, no adjustments, so that the color picker will ignore my adjustment layers when choosing the colors, which will allow the color picker to do that more accurately. I would highly recommend if you use adjustment layers in your work to play around with those settings, and it will make you much happier. So you don't have to turn off your adjustment layer, pick your color, and then turn it back on again. You can just pick and be happy. So now I'm kind of looking at this guy, and he's looking pretty good. I think this shape around his tail, that one right there, is looking a little lumpy. If I sort of blur my vision and look at it, it's just kind of this big sort of globby shape. So I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more sort of a sense of where the other tail, or where the, like how thick the tail is. I might even not want to overlap it. The overlapping might be part of what's causing it, though. We can figure that stuff out later. So now that I have my gradient map, I can paint with my grays. Like you'll notice if you look over here, that is not brown, that is straight gray. But as I paint, it's turning out the color. That's the gradient map doing its thing. So I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna start rendering just a little bit. I'm gonna kind of collapse down my stuff. You'll notice that changed something about the way the gradient map is calculating the color, but I don't mind at this stage. This is pretty, yeah. So I'm going to make a change to the gradient map. I merged down all my layers just to make it easier for myself. But you'll notice that changed the way that the gradient map was calculating the color of the body. So I liked the previous color of the body. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make this adjustment layer onto a clipping mask. I'm just going to darken it down a little bit and then merge that in. And now it's back to closer to where it was before. I'm not working very precisely at this stage. The precise values at this point are absolutely not important. So I'm just sort of thinking about what I'm kind of the musculature in the dragon. So this one is like really big shoulders, and he flies, so he's pretty good flyer. I'm gonna think about this shape here. In fact, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select this out because this would be easier to work. This would be easier to work on if it was its own layer. So I'm gonna copy it. I'm gonna delete that. And now you kind of have that on its own layer, and that's nice. So then I can lock the transparency and kind of go in and, make that a little darker. And this is kind of where I start coming up with this is a layer structure where I can work quickly and if I want to lighten things up or darken things down, I can do that pretty easily. So if I want to make this wing lighter to kind of push it back into space, I can do that. Okay. And actually this time I've been painting with actually no opacity at all. I work with very, very, very opaque brushes. Personal preference, again, it's not right or wrong. It's just what works for you. It's what you like to do. So here's we have some kind of a nice misty feeling thing going on, which I'm kind of digging. It'll work. Yeah, well, it'll be fine. Okay, we'll figure that out later. That's fine. So you'll notice I've been kind of ignoring the comb, the sort of iconic head shape. We are not very far along on the face here at all. So the reason for this is that the comb is kind of the scariest part of this image, at least for me, who's trying to make a design that feels halfway cool. Because the comb of a rooster I think it is by far the most important and iconic thing that says this is a cartoon rooster, do not take this seriously. If you had a dragon with a rooster comb coming at you, like, okay, you'd be scared because it's dragon coming at you, but it would be kind of ridiculous. It would be way worse to be killed by the rooster dragon than it would be to be killed by the normal dragon, or the non-rooster comb dragon. And this is just because it's that iconic shape of that red kind of like of that red comb. So I'll do it in red. So I'll put it. This is now above that. So you put that on a dragon, and like, come on, it looks like Foghorn Leghorn now. It goes from like, oh hey, it's kind of a fun creature, to why is Foghorn Leghorn screaming at me? So we have to be very, very careful about how we do this particular thing. And now roosters come with many, many, many comb shapes, but they all have certain things in common, which is this sort of flatness and these little sort of fleshy projections that come out come out from this. In this case, I've done 3. They usually have a lot more than that, but you know, and they're sort of irregular, and they're a very sort of recognizable shape. And those things in our culture definitely like just give you so many associations. And there are associations that in this case, for what I'm doing today, they're not associations I particularly want to bring up. When cockatrices were more popular in the public imagination, I have to think that a rooster was they had different cultural associations with them. So they would have thought about them differently, such that a dragon with a rooster comb would have been a lot cooler. I have to think that's true. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was always kind of dumb, but you never know. This is my thought process about it anyway. I think it looks kind of silly, so I don't really want it on my cool cockatrice. So that backwards shape, I think, is the backwards sweeping shape. I think is one of those very. That's one of the things that really says chicken. Like it says this is definitely a rooster. He is going to crow at dawn, and that is what's going to happen, and that's what's bringing up the association. So I think if we can do this in a way that maybe sweeps the shape forward, we can still get that feeling. We can still evoke the rooster without evoking the barnyard part of it. And I kind of like where that's going. That's kind of fun. I don't mind that. It kind of looks like a horn, which it wouldn't be like, were we to go fully render this, we would make sure that looked like skin, but that I think actually does a lot for me. With regards to that, I think that's actually pretty good. It's a good starting place anyway. And so I'm just gonna render this out, see how much that works. Kind of has these fleshy projections doing the thing. Yeah, I don't mind that. Seems pretty good. I also kind of like it because you sort of see the lines of the feathers and of the wattles and of the comb kind of all point towards its eyeballs, which is something I really like because this is a creature who, you know, it kills you by turning you to stone, like I said. And if the lines of the creature point to its eyes, and its eyes are a very sort of scary or at least notable and contrasty element of its design, that seems entirely appropriate to me. So if its design tells you, look at my eyeballs because that's how I'm going to murder you, then that seems great to me. That's what I want to see. So to that end, I'm going to kind of try to render his eyeballs a little bit more. And I kind of like the idea that his eyes are really creepy. That I don't think he would have glowing eyes, because I feel like glowing eyes they're often a little bit overused in culture, and they mean like, oh, this thing is really magical and powerful, which is cool, but like I feel like only the most awesome and the most powerful stuff should have glowing eyes, because it's really hard to. Eyes are so important for understanding a character, that if they glow, they automatically look. They're just much harder to read. It's harder to see where creatures are looking. It's harder to see. It's harder to see all these kinds of things, and they make something feel like distant and inscrutable, and like that stuff is great if what you want is inscrutable distance, because sometimes you do. But today I don't feel like we want inscrutable distance. I feel like we want fear and terror kind of thing. So I feel like I want him to have bright eyes. I want him to have bright eyes that contrast a lot with the rest of his face, but I don't want glowing. So what I think is like he'll have like a dark face and he'll have bright eyes, and so a bright like reflective eyes, like kind of blind looking or cave dwellery looking, and so that will sort of contrast really nicely there. Conversely, you could do maybe a lighter colored face with really like black inky eyes that were like, you know, just like black marbles or something, and then have the lines of the design also point to that. That would also be a fun thing to do. It would give you definitely a different challenge than what I've decided here today, but it could still achieve the same end. So it's not even about like, oh, this is the right choice. It's about just like, what do you want to do, and thinking of good and fun and novel ways to achieve it. So in this case, there's a very, very dark colored chicken type. You guys have probably seen the pictures of it on the internet, but everything about them is black. It's all like this sort of beautiful iridescent black. Even their meat is like black. And I think they're from Indonesia, and they're just really cool. So I think that that kind of thing is sort of fun to evoke in a chicken creature, because it's such a cool chicken breed. I'm putting teeth in because, you know, chickens don't have teeth, but that's all right. Dragons do, so I feel like we can justify it. Not that you need to be able to justify everything in a design anyway. I have things I want to do, and if there are things that are cool enough that I feel like, well, I'll do this even if I don't really have a justification for it. But it also depends on the project, because sometimes projects are sort of more realistic and you need justifications for them, and other times they're just kind of like, well, you know, it's fantasy. It's sort of in any given project there's like an expectation for reality, for the level of reality in this thing, and that's sort of where you are, where your mind should be, is like thinking how much reality and verisimilitude do I need for this particular project, and then structuring your decisions around that. I find most projects like that you need to be it kind of needs to be in the back of your head, but it's not, you know, you don't have to have like like chickens do not have biologically justified teeth, therefore you must not have them. and also thinking about when you do deviate from reality, like, is it adding something? If it is, totally go ahead and do it in most cases, I think. But if it's not, if it's deviating from reality and it just isn't adding anything, then maybe you don't want to. It's just one of those things. Everybody has to find their own line, and you know, I have my personal preferences, but I'm probably more of a stickler than most people. But those are just for me. I don't mind other people do it as long as it's cool stuff. I think people should pretty much make the cool stuff they want to make. I'll do my designs how I want them, and others can do designs how they want them. So yeah, I think that's kind of coming along, kind of fun. Kind of think, like, is this too chickeny? This is kind of getting on the line. Maybe it is. Thinking about the whole creature. I'll go into another part, and we can revisit the head again later on and see if it feels good once I have all this other stuff in here. So kind of thinking, I'm gonna merge some of my layers down. So starting to think about the tail. Start rendering anatomy a tiny bit. I'm just doing this kind of from memory. This is not realistic in any way. Take a smudge tool. Got a good smudge brush. I find I'm using smudge brush a lot more these days, ever since I found out that as soon as if you turn off blending in your brush settings, smudgy things become much more doable. Like, it won't take forever for your computer to calculate your smudges. So here I'm just kind of adding a bit of volume to the feathers, or just starting to add a bit of volume to the feathers. Here I'm still mostly thinking about shape and about how things are coming. So I'm thinking that there's something that feels like a little bit too busy, or a little bit too, like, iconically chickeny about this shape. So I'm wondering if there's anything I can do to kind of lessen it. I don't think it's not too bad, but it's catching my brain. So I gotta figure it out. Yeah, maybe that's fine. We'll come back to this in a bit. All right, we can start to think about, let's start to think about the tail a little bit more. So yeah, to get that kind of sinuous snake-like dragon tail thing, kind of thinking, I've got sort of boa constrictors in my head right now, where they sort of do this thing where they kind of come out a little bit and it curls back on themselves, and then as it hits the ground, it kind of pinches over. But since it's a dragon, it should probably have spikes. Like, the only part right now that has spikes to speak of is the most of them are on the head, and there's a couple here and there elsewhere. But kind of thinking about, like, how can I transition the feeling of spikes onto the tail that feels consistent, like it comes from the same animal. Like this, like right now, the way I've knocked in the spikes there, that does not feel to me like it's from the same animal. I have a couple of ways I can deal with that. I can either bring some of those regular spikes up closer to the top and kind of transition them into the feathers, which this feels very dinosaur-y to me, and is like, it's okay, but for me it feels too much like I'm adding dinosaur parts onto it. Like it just feels too dinosaur-y, and I don't want to have dinosaur associations either. I want to have dragony, mythical, middle of the forest in King Arthur's Camelot kind of business. That more those vibes than this is a a real creature that actually lives. I think there's subtleties around this, and different people probably have different thoughts on this, but like something feeling mythical versus something feeling like biologically plausible. I don't feel like this needs to feel biologically plausible, or there's a level of biological plausibility that goes too far. That like maybe it's realistic, but it's not. But it doesn't feel like it comes out of an epic poem or anything. There's a lot of squishiness around that. So it's this part of the process when I sort of try to start thinking about a little bit more about subordinate shapes. Here I'm trying to kind of add that leg that I talked about a bit before, and I'm trying to add it in sort of a way that kind of makes it feel like the creature is creeping across the ground. And I'm running into the idea that the way I've drawn the tail is kind of interfering with what I want to do with the legs. So what I can actually do on this one is kind of give myself a little bit more space on the canvas. I have no compunctions about doing this part. Just like adding a little more space. I could also make him a little bit smaller on the canvas, but since I like the height of where this is right now, I'm just going to give myself a little bit more width. And I'm going to grab the tail and work out proportions. Grab the tail. And one thing I like to do is when I do this, I select a slightly larger portion than what I actually delete. So this is what I'm copying. I'm going to take kind of a section at the base and then delete that. So that way I still have like a little bit of material there. So if I want to make this longer, I can kind of just do that. So I can do, yeah, so there's just like a little bit still left on that part. That means that I don't have to paint back in as much into it. Not that it super matters a lot at this stage. It's just sort of that's a bit more useful when the painting is a little bit further along and you want to maintain what you've done. This early, it's something I have a habit of doing, but it's not something that's particularly important. So now that I've given myself a little bit more space, I don't know if that's quite enough space yet. It might be. It's kind of big feet. So I also need to sort of think about the spur a little bit. So that's kind of going back there. And because I think this guy, at the moment, our fake concept environment is sort of a misty space, I'm going to lighten it to sort of push it back in space a little more. So it's there, but it's not in your face, and you can see there's a little bit of depth there. Often I find that's a kind of nice way to do concepts where you just sort of imagine they're sort of in a slightly misty environment. You bring some of the tones that are in the background onto the creature. It's not super important for design, but it just sort of makes a slightly nicer image. And here's where I sort of want to start thinking a little bit more about the wings. Like, I think these wings are okay. They're fine. I kind of like the way they're sitting in the space, but they're not scary. They're not really doing a whole lot for the design of the creature. They're not reinforcing anything I really care about in the design. So kind of going to try to add like somewhat more creepy, sort of more knuckly shapes. These are supposed to be dragon wings, so they're going to do fairly straightforward dragon wings to start out with, and then we can think of ways to make them a little bit more unique to a cockatrice. I think it's sort of these fingers here are pointing downwards, but I'm thinking it might be more fun to try them pointing upwards. just because maybe that'll work. Maybe that'll be like sort of a little different feeling. Kind of have big knuckly fingers. Let's see how that works. Maybe big sort of big flight membrane. Sort of indicating I'm accidentally going on my wrong layer here. Whenever I go on the wrong layer, this is basically what I do. I just kind of select the bits that that I just painted and then try to put them back on the correct layer, which, you know, pretty much works. And so I'm gonna get rid of these. Maybe, here's a kind of fun thing. So if we're thinking about like, okay, it's a cockatrice, it has spurs on its legs. Maybe we can do something kind of like echoing the same shapes of the spurs on the wings too. So if they're sort of big and straight and look like they might stab you, that could be a fun thing that's like a little different. It's funny when you're doing a creature like a dragon, because like everybody has painted a dragon, and so there's a gazillion different ideas of what they ought to be. There's obviously clusters around certain things, like they have horns in the backs of their heads, they have scales, they have big tails, but there's really a lot of things that you can do with a dragon that will feel either more sort of iconic fairy tale dragon or sort of more modern real creature type dragon. Like I'd say an iconic fairy tale dragon is definitely your like Maleficent kind of creature, where it's that sort of kind of chubby body with like the sinuous tail and and kind of smallish wings. For me, that's that. And if I wanted a dragon to do a dragon that kind of had that quality, I would probably try to use those shapes. But if I wanted a dragon that was like the dragon from the Dragon Riders of Pern, which is very like a super different context, but still a dragon, then you do very different choices. In those cases, I kind of like it when I flip it that way. It's kind of fun. Let's keep that. Anyway, yes, Dragon Riders of Pern, because they're actually aliens, right? And they're really not dragons in the way we normally think about them. But they have to feel close enough to a dragon to justify using the word. So it's actually a very, very different design task. And you're sort of trying to keep in mind all of these associations that your audience will have, and work within those structures. So yeah, I kind of like the way these wings are going on. These are like not very anatomically plausible, but I think they look kind of fun. And it's a way to add in. It almost looks a little bit more birdy, but which is something I like for obvious reasons on him. And feeling a little bit unusual. It's kind of half folded, so you kind of have the wrist here. You can have the wrist here, and you've got like a thumb finger here. And you got a first finger and a second finger. First finger here and a second finger there. Then you have a third finger. And then I'm sort of thinking about how the shapes are going to overlap. I kind of like, when it's big wings, I kind of like them to have something like a little bit like an umbrella about them, where like you have a half closed umbrella and the fabric of the umbrella is kind of loose and billowing, and it kind of just makes the animal feel really, really big and I don't know if it makes them. It probably doesn't make them more intimidating, but it makes them feel large and animal-like. So I kind of like where that's going. That's kind of fun. But that makes me think I should have a little bit more height on this one, so that the silhouette here, because before you can see there was kind of a yucky tangency between this line, I'll use a brighter color. There's kind of a yucky tangency between this line, and that really flattens things out badly. So you'd either want to move this up or move this down. In this case, I think up is better. Yeah, I think up is better. But you could do either. It really is. It really depends. If you move it down, you'll kind of make it feel like your camera, or your camera is lower. And I want to keep it sort of in a more. I want to keep it in a higher camera, just because it's less dramatic, but it's often better for showing form, and it's kind of better for a concept. But you know, different things work differently on that. You could justify either choice, really. So yeah, and here I'm just bringing this one into to kind of. Actually, I'm going to use the selection because it's faster. Bring that there. I'm also going to smudge this a tiny bit. This is just because a blurrier line will appear more distant than a close line. So it just kind of pushes it back in space a little bit more. It's both lower contrast and blurrier, so that's the kind of thing that just is like, yeah, this is the wing in the back. Don't worry too much about this. So yeah, and in this case, I'm kind of second guessing myself. Where now I'm like, well, maybe I want to kind of pitch this as though it's at a different angle, like it's holding its arms a little bit differently from one another. So that's kind of a different choice. And I'm just kind of going around seeing what choices I like. In this case, that's now bringing that up a little bit too close to the top edge of the canvas. So I'm going to move everything down. But that pesky tangency is still happening. So in this case, in a case like this, I might move this upwards, and so it really, I might move that upwards and this downwards, so that I really am selling that angle difference. It's something. It kind of makes it look like a hunchback, which actually I don't hate. That actually seems kind of fun, and like not something you would see in a dragon most times. And so it's at this stage when I sort of start thinking a little bit more about my creature's body. Right now I haven't done much with it. I sort of have like a deltoid here and a clavicle kind of there. I expect, because birds have really, really big clavicles because they need enormous breastbones to work their flight muscles. Even chickens, like they have big keels on their sternum, so that can attach all their flight muscles too. This is one of those things that is also like, technically creatures that fly have certain anatomical features that allow them to do that. And an animal this size, I mean, I guess there are a few animals in history that were around this big that actually did fly, but really not very many. You guys might have seen pictures of Asdarchid pterosaurs. The biggest ones of those, when they stood, were the size of giraffes. They were absolutely enormous. When they flew, they were like fighter jets, and yeah, like walked around with big long necks and heads like giraffes. I kind of imagine them being like really big storks, like giraffe-sized storks when they were on the ground, but they actually did fly, and it was pretty amazing. But this guy, who knows? This guy feels a little bit heavier than those ones were. And so in real life, were you to have a creature as absurd as this one in real life, they would not be able to fly. I don't think this is a problem. And because it's just about fun and what's cool. So I don't think we have to bend over backwards to make like anatomically justified choices by any means, but it's fun to think about it to some degree, like to feel plausible. I feel like plausibility, it's more like, what will the viewers believe, and then kind of go towards that, or what makes me believe it, even if I know it's not actually possible. So here, I'm gonna do, so he's gonna be kind of skinny. I like him being skinny. So you can see his rib cage. And you get like, I'm gonna use some of my human anatomy and do like a serratus anterior here. I don't know if birds have serratus anteriors. I don't know that much about bird anatomy, but I think it's kind of fun anyway. To have it look a little human-y. And here I'm just using a smudge tool to kind of even things out. Sort of as it starts getting into the hip bone. I'm gonna move over to a different brush. I don't know if people are still as keen on brushes as they used to be, but I find, I mean, obviously having different brushes is a really useful tool, but I don't find that they're like, you can kind of look around, you can poke around and you can find your favorite ones, and certain things will appeal to you, and it's all sort of personal choice. You can make really good paintings with, you know, just your round brush and just your and just like you can make really good paintings with almost any brush, and so it's just down to like what you personally like using. I have my favorites, and they are generally things that I've gathered and bought over the years, and just it's a, like, I've never made a brush that I actually like often use. So if people ask me to use my brushes, I'm kind of like, well, they're not really mine, so like I feel kind of weird giving them away. But they're all things that you can find around the internet or purchase that people have made. So just kind of poke around, see what you like, try out new things every now and then, and maybe you'll find you add a new one to your repertoire. They won't make you a good painter if you're not already a good painter, but they will allow you to use your skills to better, to use skills you already have to better effect sometimes. So it's like a small thing around the edges. You know, using Sargent's paintbrushes will not let you paint like Sargent, but it's probably better than using the cheapo ones from the craft store, right? So here I'm doing the thing that I was just talking about, where I'm sort of bringing the background color onto the design, and it just sort of makes it mesh into the environment a little bit more, and gives it some depth without me having to work too hard at it. I like sort of the longer I've been doing this, the more I like when I'm trying to do a particular thing, any particular thing, to try to figure out ways to isolate the number of problems I'm trying to solve at once at any given time. And there are many ways to do this, but it's sort of like, if you want to design a character or creature, don't try to do it when they're in a kind of like crazy perspective pose where, you know, you're on the floor and you're looking like way up under their chin. Like, you can do that, and that's definitely a thing you can do, but that's not really, if you're trying to design something and you're trying to design that character, unless that's the only view you ever see that character from, which is pretty unlikely, it's best just to try to strip out. It's just to try to strip out those extra cognitive tasks that are important. So if you're designing a character, like, have it from a pretty neutral angle. And if you're, you know, if you're trying to figure out like what the facade of a house looks like, maybe draw it in like an orthographic front perspective first before you try to draw the whole house in 3D and that kind of thing. There are people that are so practiced at that stuff that it doesn't matter to them, but I think anytime you're doing something that you're not completely an expert, and you can do absolutely thoughtlessly, that you could do almost perfectly without any thought at any time, then just kind of try to break it out. See if you can find a way to separate the number of things you're trying to decide at any one time. So I'm kind of liking how this is going so far. This seems pretty fun. Kind of have this hunchbacky kind of business going on there, which I think is pretty cool. Although he's looking a little bit too human-like, so I might which I don't mind, but it's maybe the peck is like a little bit, it's looking a little bit weird. Like, why is this thing also a human in addition to a chicken and a dragon? That's probably a bit much. So I'm gonna kind of cut back on the degree to which I think that is true. But also that pectoralis is probably even bigger on something that has to fly. So that'll probably, if I make that bigger, it'll look more humanish. It'll look, or rather, it'll look less humanish because no human has a pectoralis that big. And there he has it on his kind of sternum. All right, so that's kind of fun. I'll do a little bit more on the tail. I'm gonna try to do a bit more of these. Get it, that sort of sinuous quality. I remember seeing pictures, I think they kind of have little dragonish spikes at the end of their tails. I kind of like that, though. You can have one of those. So that's new here. Merge that in. You'll notice I'm not building up my layers too much. This is just sort of like I have 3 that I'm meaningfully working on. This is fine, and I'm working on a relatively large 27-inch monitor. So all of this stuff, I like to keep it, at this stage I like to keep it pretty far back, but then if I'm like, oh, that foot is really not resolved, then I can go in and zoom in and do more stuff. It's often better when you're designing, when you're at this stage, when you're designing shapes, keep it pretty broad. Keep it pretty broad at the beginning, because any decision you make at a sort of medium to small scale, it can really affect the overall read of the whole creature. So that's partly why I have my navigator here, so that I can always kind of look back and see what the whole thing looks like. But try to keep it broad. Like if I all of a sudden want to change the way this kind of lump is looking, like that totally affects the overall silhouette. That's a minor change, so that's not like the best example. But if I wanted to make this spur like a lot longer or something, that maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But it's harder to tell if you're zoomed in. And sometimes it can help you determine your values as well, because if you're zoomed in, you'll want to be like, oh, I'll go in and I'll do all these scales and it'll be cool. But maybe you do that in a way that's kind of too contrasty, because it looks good as a foot, but in the context of the creature, you realize like, oh no, I should have made those way less contrasty, because I want the foot to read as a shape rather than like a bunch of scales. That's namely the thing about contrast, is that it helps you, using a smart use of contrast kind of helps you figure out, it helps you guide people's eyes around what you're doing, and allows you to do something you need to do. Like, I need to have scales on that foot for the kind of thing I'm doing. I need scales on that foot. I want scales on that foot, but I don't want that to be like, it's the scaly-footed cockatrice. Like, it's not supposed to be the thing that you notice. If you look closely at the foot, you would see, yes, it has scales, but I don't care if the viewer is like noticing that. I don't care if they are really appreciating how I've designed the scales, because it's just not important to the creature. They need to be there. I want them to be there. It's a thing, but it's not the point. And contrast is the thing that really helps you highlight the point and sort of like bring up to the top the things you really want people to notice, and subdue things that you think are less important, or less important to the read and the emotional impression of the work. Like, if I want you to be scared of this guy, I would probably highlight things like his eyes, which can turn you to stone, and his big scary spurs, and his big scary claws, and his giant wings, which will allow you to move, which will allow him to move really closely, and really close to you really fast, kind of thing. So like, all that kind of stuff is stuff I care about, and the rest is the fact that he has a serratus anterior. Like, it's cool, it's fun to an artist, and it sort of adds believability to the creature, but it isn't primary read. So I'm going to readdress the head. I kind of like the way the torso is coming here. I think that's nice. That's all good, but I kind of want to readdress the head, because I feel like the head is it's a little too chickeny. It's not as cool as I want it to be. It's not as cool as I want it to be. So I will spend a little bit more work. I'm going to take out these teeth. Not that I don't like the teeth. I think he will have teeth in the end, but I think this beak shape is just kind of, it's a little too chicken, let's just say. So I kind of want to see if I can't make something that will still do what we want it to do, but be a little bit cooler, or just be a little bit less, be a little bit more monster, a little bit less chicken. So I think making a slightly longer beak is a good idea. I think having a little bit of kind of raggedness around that beak, or like slightly angrier eyes is nice too. Something that if you want something to look more badass, often if you make it look a little bit angry, it will look more like it's about to attack something, which is, you know, that's, I think maybe when people say they want something badass, I think what they mean is that it is like intimidating and aggressive and to some extent aspirational. So I think that's actually what the word badass means. And while I don't think a cockatrice is likely to be very aspirational in any context, I think it could look more aggressive, and it could look more powerful. So I think that's kind of what that means. So I think that already is looking a little bit better. If we kind of look over here on our like if we look at it kind of far away, that head is sort of, it's kind of got I think it's got like a nice shape, a nice sweep to the shape that I really like. Sort of this, where this is coming in this way and these are coming in this way. Things like that's coming straight up here, that kind of does this, and then this kind of does that and that. So that's actually, I like the way that those are all sort of revolving shapes. I think actually the thing that's stopping that from working is the wattle on his chin, which is just kind of like all of these other shapes kind of have this nice sweep that's heading towards the eye. And this thing just it's kind of inert. It kind of is countering that. Like it's kind of just going straight up and down. And it's not too bad, but it's not doing the thing. It's not doing the thing I want. So maybe making it like a little echo the top one a little bit more might work, and having it angle a little more towards, like a little more in line with what these feathers are doing down here could work. I think that's awesome. So I actually don't mind that, where the feather sort of ends sooner, and then you kind of have these these wattles here. I don't mind that. So now I'm going to start adding the ears. We have to think a little bit about the ears on this guy. A lot of people kind of forget ears when it comes to birds because they don't have the sort of big exterior structures of an ear the way like a human or a dog or a cat, and mammals in general usually have. But they do have ears, and they do they tend to show up as either just they're completely covered by feathers, in which case you don't have to worry about it. In our case, because this is based on a rooster and they don't really have much in the way of feathers on their faces, the ears do show up, and they really just end up looking like holes on the sides of their heads, which can look either sort of fairly neutral, but sometimes have sort of little feathery coverings on the inside, so it kind of looks like they have hair on the inside of their ears, which can look a little weird and gross. I don't mind leaning into the just the bare hole. I think that makes a lot of sense for this guy. That I don't mind, but now I have kind of these three very even feather shapes, which is bad. So I'm going to make one of them bigger, and then I think a lot of people call that phenomenon twinning. In this case, I guess tripleting, where you've done things right next to, you've done two things right next to one another that shouldn't be the same size and shape, and then it's distracting for them to have the same size and shape. Because when things are duplicated in that way, it often draws more attention to them, and that happens when it's something that you do not want to draw attention to. So in this case, the way to do it is just to make one a little bigger and the other two a little smaller, and they stop drawing attention to themselves in a way that you don't want. So that's kind of fun. I like the way that's looking. It's better. I guess he doesn't have. I guess he doesn't have teeth. Maybe. Well, let's see. Let's try to put the teeth back in and see where we get. I kind of want them to look sort of scraggly. I don't want them to be like really even teeth. I want them to be tiny teeth. And I want them to look scraggly. So I want them to be kind of at slight angles to one another, like they're not quite placed right, or some are like curved a little bit too much. Let's see if that works, because he's sort of a scruffy animal, and I feel like he would have scruffy teeth as well. Yeah, that's not bad. This one, I like this tooth, but it's too big, so I'm gonna take it down. That's too many. That's too many too. Okay, I kind of like that. That's kind of fun. So I still feel like the tail and the head feel like different animals, and then the body is kind of just not doing a whole lot to help us with that. So what I'm gonna do is kind of smooth things out a little bit with my smudge. This will allow me sort of a slightly blanker canvas to paint on top of. And I'm going to make a new layer because I want to be able to get rid of this, to see if we can't incorporate a few of these feathers a little bit further on. Because here I have some feathers obviously indicated up here. And this kind of looks like bear skin. And exactly where it turns from feathers to bear skin between there is not super obvious. So I'm going to try to clarify that transition a little bit. And I want these to be sort of, I don't know if you guys have seen like rooster feathers that they have on their neck. There are a lot of variety in the way their feathers can look, but a lot of them have these sort of long, sort of semi-rigid spear-like feathers, and that's kind of what I'm looking for, where they kind of get dark at the tips and they just feel sort of sharp. And if we can kind of add that in and think like, oh yeah, this is kind of where one is, and then sort of indicate a few sharp shapes, and then kind of have more of this kind of fluffy. We don't want him to be too fluffy. We want him to be we want him to look a little bit like he's wet. Like that sort of enhances the sharpness of the shapes. So I don't mind that. So that's one thing. It's not bad, but still it's all on the neck. So we want to continue. I'm going to continue that a little bit further onto the body, but I think we make it less dense because we do want it to transition into scales before too long, like dragon type scales. So exactly when that happens, I think they would get, but the spikes at this point will be more feathers. Actually, you know what? I think that is actually the case where the feathers, like the spikes of the dragon, will be more like feather quills. So there's a certain point when they transition from like real feathers to quills, and it's kind of a softer transition throughout the whole body. But since it sort of happens gradually, there still might be like a few little fluffy things down by the end of the tail, but they feel like they work with each other, even though they're a little bit different. If they're based on the same thing and the same types of shapes, they'll feel right together. Okay, still continuing with that. I think that'll work pretty well. I'm going to refine the shape around here a lot. This is kind of what I do, where I sort of, my sketches are not super pretty sketches, so what I do is I make an ugly sketch and then I sort of refine it until I'm happy with it. There are certain aspects I like of how the tail is working, but I would definitely not call this anywhere. I don't think it's pretty. It's fine. Yeah, I wouldn't leave it like this. Some people are very declarative with their sketches, and those are incredibly talented individuals. I am a noodler. I am a person who will put it down. It will probably not be pretty when I first put it down, and I will fiddle with it until until it does the thing, whatever the thing is. I know some people think of art like you have the perfect idea of what you want in your head before you sit down and do it. And I know there are some people who absolutely do work like that. I am not one of them. I kind of usually have a vague notion of what I'm after in my head, and I have to get something down on paper, or else like my mind just doesn't want to think about it, or it's like, why aren't you drawing this? You could be doing much better if you were drawing this right now. So sometimes you just have to draw something in order to be able to start making decisions about it. It's totally okay if you don't have the design like fully formed in your head before you sit down. It's okay to play and to sort of dance around and see what you can make work in the middle of trying to do something. There are many different ways to get good effects, I think. I think half of art is just figuring out like what are the ways that work for you, and figuring out how to make your context one where you can make the work you want to make, and find out the ways that work for you. Watching tutorials of a lot of different artists help with this a lot, because you never know what someone's going to say that sort of twigs something for you, or something that someone that is just it's a suggestion that happened at exactly the right time for you, and that happened at exactly the right time for you to be able to understand it and put it into practice. And if you'd heard that suggestion a year before, maybe it wouldn't have helped you, but hearing it again can just twig something and give you an idea that you didn't have before, and help you in your artistic development. I have a number of notions like that. One of the most useful that I ever got was at a conference, was at a conference in San Francisco, and the artist, who I really, really respected, looked at my stuff and he said, you're not drawing anatomy the way it really looks. You're drawing it the way you think it looks, which at the time, I think I heard that. There was a time earlier where if I had heard that, I would have just been like, what? I don't know what that means. I know how anatomy works. But I knew exactly what he meant at that point, because I had been taking an anatomy class at university at the time, and I said, I don't know, I don't remember what I said in the moment, but he was absolutely right. And I'm like, oh man, you're totally like, that is perfect. And so I'm like, I have to go figure out what, like, the thing, we all have these sort of symbolic notions in our heads of how things are. Like if you draw a face, 2 eyes and a mouth, right? And then one of the first things you learn in art school is you're like, no, the eyes are actually down here and the mouth is there. And, then that's a much more realistic face. But we think of a face symbolically with the eyes at the top. That's exactly the kind of thing that it is. And that sort of misperception happens everywhere. Like our brains are built to sort of give us simplified ways to think about things. And those simplified ways are often, importantly, very wrong. So I think learning to do art is actually, a lot of it is learning how to kind of turn off the symbolic modes of perception that your brain really, really, really wants to do and is very, very good at. Those symbolic things are really important, but when it comes to art, they just kind of get in the way. I'd heard, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I'd heard that there's a part of child development where kids actually like intuitively get perspective, and then they stop getting perspective at a certain point because they're starting to think symbolically of like, oh, the ground is a flat line, so I shall draw it as a flat line. But really, like, that's not how our eyes are actually seeing it, but it is how our brains are perceiving it. So this is going all right, except now with this leg, I've sort of introduced another tangency where like this This toe is really close to that spur, so I kind of want to move that spur because I like this toe. I like this foot being there, but I kind of really want to move that spur. So I can probably just angle it downwards a little bit more. There are a couple ways you can deal with this kind of thing. I can kind of angle it downwards a little more. Though I don't know that actually fixes it. It really doesn't. Maybe it does a little bit. It's better. And I can kind of rotate that. And if I do that and kind of bring this down. So tangencies are one of those things that they're things that happen in art where your lines are telling you a thing about the space that you're depicting that is not actually true. It's like where two objects touch that really don't have any business touching. Actually, here's one that I did, and that one's not too noticeable because there are other cues saying that, oh, this shape here is behind this shape, but sometimes that's not enough to actually fix it. So if you're thinking about how to fix a tangency like this, probably what it is it's not too bad a tangency because there's enough distance between there that if I add another cue or two to tell you that this leg is behind the other leg, it's probably going to be enough to stop it from being a problem. So in this case, I moved that leg a little bit back. I'm gonna blur it a little more. And I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit. That's done. And I'll lighten it up a little bit. So yeah, that's probably a bit too much lightening, but you get what I mean. The idea is that a tangency is it flattens the space you're trying to make in a way that is bad, that you don't want, in a way that is unintended. Think about your lines. It's just a matter of like thinking about your lines and about how you want to be depicting the space, and thinking of like, does any particular placement of something help my goal or hurt my goal? And if it helps it, awesome. If it hurts it, change. That's kind of the thing. A lot of things like this people run into, and problems are caused by just not having a concrete goal in mind. If you're doing a design and you weren't referring back to whatever goals you had in your head, that's often a way you find you're trying to do too many things at once and it's not doing any of them particularly well. And so then you kind of just need to go back and simplify and figure out like what's important. And like, do my sub goals support my larger goals and all that kind of stuff. It's if you ever find that your designs or your illustrations are kind of just not that interesting, it's often because your aims were not very clear. So even just clarifying that in your own head at a certain point can be really, really valuable. Because then if you have a goal, you can it's a way of sort of closing off potential directions so that you can go more decisively in a single direction. Like you won't go very far if you're trying to take a step in all directions. You want all your steps to be in a single direction. And that's not to say you shouldn't play, because you certainly should, but when you have too many possibilities, it often becomes difficult to make any decisions. So choosing one or two goals, like a primary goal and a couple subsidiary goals, will often make your decision structure much easier. Kind of thinking, what's the story I want to tell? How do I want people to feel about this? What makes people feel particular ways about creature designs or whatever. So here's where I think I'm going to start rendering the face a little more. Again, I feel like I have slightly neglected the face in this one. It's kind of working, but I feel like it could work better. It could work better again. And I really want to get that whole like I will murder you with my eyes kind of vibe on this guy, because it's really quite important to the vibe of this creature to be very threatening visually, because they turn you to stone. So if you were to meet one of these guys in a dark alley, I want all of the lines on its body to kind of be directing you to its face. It wants you to look at its eyes because it wants you to be a statue forever. That's its meaning in life. It is to turn you personally into a hunk of rock, static hunk of rock. So in order to do this, I feel like, yeah, having that sort of milky, subterranean kind of look to its eyes is sort of a nice metaphor. Though, thinking about it, like, why does it want to turn things to stone? Like, does it eat stone? Like, it seems like it would rather just eat you. But I don't think that's exactly how people were thinking of when they were creating these guys. So maybe we just need to not think too much about it. So anyway, he's trying to turn you to stone. He doesn't like you. He wants you to be a rock. And this is the way he uses to get you to look him in the eye and make his day. So yeah, talking about glowing eyes, I do think glowing eyes is a bit too much for this guy. It's like he's a powerful creature, but he's magical, but he's not Dr. Manhattan. So I feel like Dr. Manhattan has glowing eyes. This guy doesn't need glowing eyes. But I want them to feel luminous and sort of mesmerizing. It looks glowy. Luminous and mesmerizing in a way that you would want to look right at them. So if you have this dark face with these very bright eyes, and maybe he doesn't blink, so maybe he has like weird, like black tears that kind of gum up his eyelids, and just generally look yicky. You kind of have these funny scaly eyelids. I don't know if you guys like how closely you guys have looked at chickens. Some of you probably fairly closely, but I would wager most people haven't. They do have quite an intensity to them. I don't know. They have round pupils, and in this case, we could make the eye round, but I think that sort of lends into the goofiness. So I think making him look like a little bit angry. Chickens always look a little bit angry. Birds in general kind of have an angry look to them a lot of the time. If you look closely at them, they always kind of look a little bit displeased with something. So I think that's pretty good, but I kind of want to go in even closer and really shape this eye out a little bit more, like make it look very round, and have you be able to see his eyeball, but not but still be very contrasty with what's around it. Like sense the roundness of the eye in the socket. I kind of like that. I also think I want to see the edge of his mouth, so I kind of want to have like this sort of mouth corner. I'm gonna render that out a little more. This guy's got a lot going on his face. I feel like it's maybe a little bit too. It's a little bit too gray, a little bit too monotone right now, so that it's just kind of flat. Like I like the detail, I like the shapes, but it's a bit too flat. I kind of want to add a bit more depth to his face. And I'll have to do this by kind of adding a bit more tonal variation. Here I'm going to use overlay, which is a funny one. So if you have in this one, if you have an overlay set to 50% and it's a gray, it will do absolutely nothing. Like I'm gonna make a selection, and you see that's a 50% gray. I'm just gonna put it over there. And if I set that to overlay, it does absolutely nothing. But So the reason that it does this is it sort of when the color you're painting with on overlay is brighter than 50%, it'll lighten it and then add more of whatever color you've chosen. If it's less than 50%, it'll darken it and add more of whatever color you've chosen. This is not a very technical way of looking at it. This is how I found useful to think of it. So in this case, a 50% gray will do nothing. So if I make it a little brighter, so that's like a 59% gray, and I want to make the inside of his mouth a little lighter, that does it. If I want to make it a lot brighter, it does that. And sort of just increases the contrast of whatever's there in both cases, usually. It'll make darks a lot darker, it'll make lights a lot lighter. So that's kind of what's going on there. Never mind that, oh, sorry. Then I want to be looking at it on a macro scale and thinking, like, if I start because I want the face to be quite dark, like one of those Indonesian, one of those like really beautiful black Indonesian chickens. They have this incredible like glossy iridescent black, like black feathers, and there's even like all of their skin is black. The insides of their mouths is black, and even their meat is apparently black, which is just crazy. But they're really, really neat animals, and I kind of wanted to have a little bit of that quality to it. If I were gonna paint this guy, like if I were to fully like design him and paint him out, I would probably give him that sort of black iridescent feather quality. So I'm actually gonna make on another. In this case, it's a normal layer, but I guess I'm gonna go make that an overlay. I'm gonna make that even darker. That's a bit too dark, but it's kind of getting me a little bit of what I want with regards to interest and depth here, just making that a little bit. So maybe if his skin and his beak gets really dark, but his face and his feathers stay kind of a little lighter, that's kind of nice. That's maybe, actually I don't mind that darkness also being kind of at the top. So I'm sort of just trending the dark to be kind of towards the edges, and maybe keeping his tongue a bit brighter. I think that's kind of fun. Yeah, I sort of like that. It's pretty good. And that will make his eyes feel very, very luminous. But now I have an issue where this is definitely like one of the darkest portions of my image, and right up here is a very, very light portion. And this is very sort of black and graphic, and this is sort of very light and hazy. So it kind of doesn't really feel a ton like they're inhabiting the different parts of the animal are inhabiting the same environment. So ideally that's something you want to fix. And to do that, to fix it, we will kind of add a bit of lighting from the top. And we don't want to make it look too shiny. We just kind of want to have like a little bit of extra. Setting him into the environment a little bit more. Another way we can do this, and this is quite effective, is just to bring in like a little bit of haze. We don't want to cover up any of the decisions we're making. Like I think I added a little bit too much. I think both these are actually a little bit too much because I'm making things look less pointy, and I want them to look pointy. So this is sort of a balancing act of like making it look like it's the less important goal of making it look like it's part of the same environment. That's really a subordinate goal to our overall, like, what does this thing look like, and what is its design, and making it feel like it's all like the whole animal is existing in the same lighting environment in the same way. They're not usually contradictory goals, but one is definitely more important than the other. So that kind of guides how you should think about solving a problem. Like you should, when you're trying to solve two things at the same time, you think, which one is more important to me? And how does that goal inform, or how is that goal informed, or how is this task informed by my goal? So like in a painting, I might want to render everything really nicely so that it makes it feel like I might want to render a particular material really, really nicely, because it's lovely when materials are rendered well in paintings. But if you render one thing a lot, it's possible that something being very rendered will distract attention from something else in the image. And if I spend, 80% of my image, or like if I spend a lot of time and effort rendering a rug that isn't really, like, is nice to have in my painting, but it isn't really a main part of the story I'm trying to tell. And then everybody, because there's so much beautiful detail in this rug, everybody looks at the rug and is like, wow, what a rug. It's not really doing anything for whatever story I'm telling, unless it's a story about a rug, which, let's face it, it probably isn't. Then I have not done myself any favors by painting it in a particular way, or by painting it in a really noticeable way. It's different as saying, like, it's not don't paint it well. It's that you should think about how, mostly it's about contrast, and it's about choosing contrast. So if you paint something really well but it's low contrast, you're not going to be drawing people's attention, but you're also not going to be showcasing that thing. Like, people's eyes will glide over it. They might not notice that it's done well. Other artists will probably notice, but like your mom probably won't, unless your mom is an artist, of course. But that's okay, because different people get different things out of paintings, and you know that your buddies will be able to see what you've done and appreciate it, and other people for whom it's not as important don't necessarily need to be clued in. So it's really about choosing which elements you're showcasing and making sure those elements, again, support your goals. Okay, so I think that's working a bit better there. It's still flatter looking than the top of his back, but I'm kind of fine with that. And I'm kind of turning the form so that it gets lighter as it goes back into space, because that's sort of the misty environment that I'm doing here. So that's working for the face. I think I'll do the same thing for the tail as well, because the tail is like really, really not resolved. It's one of the least resolved portions of this piece. So I'm gonna have all of this, collapse all of that down. So because I'm done that part, when I go back to it, I'm not gonna be doing any more on that. One of the more important and the least resolved portions of this is his tail, because right now it is like super flat looking, and it's not doing me any favors for like painting skill, which is, it's fine, but I can better describe the shape such that people will be able to get a better sense of what it's doing. So as I mentioned before, I kind of want to have that sort of sinuous, like boa constrictor-y type thing. So that sort of means the tail is sort of doing a lot of S curves and going back on itself, and kind of having a little like the sense that it sort of is moving and twining and doing all that kind of stuff. So in order to do this, I'm just sort of bringing things like a little bit closer by making it brighter, and then as it tucks underneath, it gets a little darker, and as it gets further away, I'm going to do this with a selection. As it gets further away, it will get brighter. Put that on a clipping mask. For those of you who don't know what clipping masks are, they are incredibly useful things, where it's a way of having another layer that sort of respects the transparency of the layer it's clipped to. So in this case, it's a layer of it's a white fade that will only show up on top of my tail, on top of my cockatrice. This layer, and so I can make it lower. I can make it lower opacity and kind of blend it in a little bit better. And then I'll merge it in this case. I wouldn't always merge these things in, but in this case I want to, because I want it to be sort of a baked in part of the piece. All right, so that worked pretty nicely. So now that form is kind of turning well. And then as it kind of comes closer again, it can actually add a little bit more white up here. I'm not going to do it via clipping mask this time because I don't, there's not a hard line that I want it to think about. Yeah, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to have this kind of, this portion decisively overlap this portion, and have this little shape in here not kind of get trapped and be this very, like, look at me kind of little bright spot on the tail. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to overlap that pretty decisively, and I'm trying to make this light enough that you, the viewer, know that that's going behind. So this is pretty much there, so that I can still have that shape. This shape is unchanged, but now it's not trapped quite so badly in that little 2D, in that little value prison. So here I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to, as it's going back in space, I'm going to make it lighter again. And I'm doing this because it's a very diffuse lighting environment, and there's mist, so that a lot of the value is being caused by sort of like distance from the camera, like how much mist is between, when I say the camera, I mean the viewer, like how much mist is between me and that object, me, the person looking at it, and that object. So in this kind of environment, that will happen. There is also like a vague top lighting scenario as well, which is influencing that, but a lot of what's causing the value choices is that mist. I don't know if I want that to be flatter. Keep it the same. So I'll just do a bottom there. And here I can sort of start doing what I was doing up here and bringing in that kind of, that sort of top lighting that we saw at the very top of his back, just kind of hitting the top surfaces with it. I'm gonna add a few more of these feathery quills, because we don't want to forget them. He still has them. So that's kind of like how that's going. Yeah, it's pretty nice. Maybe just add like a little bit of a smudge to that. I'm really liking smudge ever since I realized that it won't kill my processor. Actually, it's actually usable. Probably has been usable for a really long time, but it wasn't when I first used Photoshop, and I won't tell you how long ago that was. So yeah, I'm pulling out again, like making sure things are working proportionally. I think it's pretty good. If I were to continue, I think a couple more quills on his neck, like really long ones, just to kind of fill up that space. And it's both kind of angry looking and is totally something that you actually get on real roosters. So that kind of, you probably have to be thicker though. Probably have to be like that. And these are super ugly. If I were doing this for real, I would do this in a very messy way and then go back in and clean them up. It's probably a bit too long. So now we'll just have one thing left. Take another stab at the wings, like really quick. I kind of feel like they're too high. I kind of want to have like an angry thumb spur, some thumb spike or something to kind of make it feel like big hands are kind of coming down at you. Something that would be pretty tricky. There's actually a species of goose called the spur-winged goose. It's a wild creature, and it has a spur pretty much exactly like what I'm painting here. They have them down at the San Diego Zoo and or Safari Park, so if anybody ever wants to go look at them, they're weird looking, very kind of primitive geese that the spur is often hidden behind feathers, but if you look it up, they're definitely really weird geese. There's a type of duck that's called a steamer duck that has these big keratinous like knobs on the edge of their wings, and they are actually like semi-flightless, where some individuals are flightless and others aren't, but they are so big and heavy that a lot of like the bigger individuals are so big and heavy that they can't fly, but they like punch each other with these sort of hardened knobs on their wings. So they're very violent little guys. Yeah, so I think that's kind of fun. That's working pretty well. So that is mythical creatures and how to paint them. Thank you guys so much for coming to watch my video. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference, and see you next time.